All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast, talking hockey. New York Islanders are in the conference final round, or the equivalent of because of this weird COVID structure we have, second year in a row. Joining today, talk some hockey. Not the usual guy you hear, Pete Consory, but a good friend of mine. He's been on the podcast before, talking NFL picks. He's hosted his own podcast, Sports in the Waiting Room podcast. Christopher Russo, not the Mad Dog, is here. Chris, how are you?
Hey, Mike, I'm doing all right, thank you. And it's the Stanley Cup semifinal. So it's like the first time we've really heard that probably since like 70s or 80s, I would say, when it was just like 12 random teams getting in.
Yeah, because I was so confused about the call it, because I'm like, yeah, this is technically what the conference finals would be in a normal year, but because you have these four random divisions, just the semifinals.
Yeah, it's just the Stanley Cup semifinals. That's what it is.
Yeah, I will say, like, I've been following the playoffs like on and off because I'm a Ranger guy, you know that, and it's disappointing that they're not there. I think it's been interesting so far.
Yeah, the playoffs have been good. Rangers, well, look, I mean, despite the managerial turnover, they have the talent that they should be there soon, and I think they have the heart that they should be there soon. What I've seen from the playoffs so far, I think generally speaking, first off, good amount of surprises, most notably Montreal. I don't think anyone, including myself, I bet you, saw Montreal going as far as they did or still being in it. Lots of overtimes early on in the postseason, which made it really exciting. The one thing I really didn't get was a lot of goalie platooning for like no reason. So in particular, the Islanders were one of them because Sorokin, I thought, was clearly the better goaltender in the Pittsburgh series. And I think he was the goaltender for all the winning games, and Varlamov was the one for the losing games. Obviously, it worked out for the Boston series because Varlamov was the guy, especially in Game 5 when he made like 40 saves. And then Fleury and Leonard, the same thing, where Leonard started the first game of this series. Obviously, that's working out for them so far because they're up 3-2 going into tonight, at least as we record this. And just a questionable discipline. You mentioned the Rangers. I tried to keep everything fair, and but I remember talking about that on my podcast. The truth, so many people screwed up, just the league, the Rangers with the whole management thing, but obviously there was the Tom Wilson, and obviously the league screwed up.
That was such a mess.
Yeah, the league screwed up with that. The officials screwed up with that. The managerial decisions screwed up. Everybody screwed up with that. And Buchnevich with a cross-check, even though, I mean, I understand why he was frustrated, that whole thing. But I think the discipline has been a little bit questionable in this postseason. Not the fact that Scheifele got suspended, but the fact that Ryan Reeves I talked about this one too. Ryan Reeves put the weight of his leg on Samuel Graves' head, and he got 2 games, and Scheifele got 4 for trying to make a fair play. And then Kadri's not exactly a clean player, but that he got 8 for that particular hit. I don't know. It's weird. Kind of inconsistent.
But the NHL, though, you feel like with the officiating and the discipline, it's also like kind of just take a dartboard out, throw a dart, and wherever it lands, that's the penalty.
Yeah, and usually it's pretty good. I mean, there's maybe like one referee with whom I have consistent complaints, but God, I love Wes McCauley so much. Everyone should love Wes McCauley. No goal! That man is a treasure. And I think the league is very transparent about they always have the videos out for explaining the suspension. They're always very transparent about it. But there have been a few decisions, and it's not just this year, but there have been a few decisions where it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think the other thing that doesn't make sense before we get to the Islanders is what the hell happened to Toronto in that Montreal series, because they find way after way after way to just choke in the playoffs big time. It's just amazing how this franchise can knock it out of the first round to save their lives.
You know what the crazy thing is? Well, first off, a lot of people don't realize Toronto now ties the Rangers for the longest drought between Stanley Cups in terms of not years, but seasons. Yeah. Now they're going to have a longer drought in terms of years than the Rangers do when you include that strike year. So it's really unbelievable to think. And when you think New York sports media is tough, for hockey, Toronto is the toughest sports media outlet. Tavares getting hurt really didn't help them, but they had a 3-1 lead in this series, and they were by far a better team than Montreal. They're such a better skilled team than Montreal. I think it's a little different when you don't have Mike Babcock behind the bench, even though, obviously he was fired, but, Sheldon Keefe is not exactly Barry Trotz or not Scotty Bowman or anybody, but they really screwed. And the thing is, as opposed to when they blew that 4-1 lead against the Bruins in Game 7 a few years ago, or when they lost to the Bruins in Game 7 a couple of years ago, or when they lost that series to the Caps in 6, at least they were facing a team that was actually better than them.
Yes.
This year, they faced a team that, don't get me wrong, they've had a good defensive structure. Carey Price carried them on the back. But Toronto is far and away, even without John Tavares, more skilled than Montreal is. And this might be the most disappointing loss they've had since, oh, God, I don't know. Maybe since that. What?
Probably the 4-1 game, I guess. The
4-1 game, or maybe you can argue the Gretzky not getting called for the high stick in '93 on Doug Gilmour in the conference final.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All I know is it's pretty crazy. You think about it, because like you said at the meet, a fair point. Because like for the New York sports fans, picture it this way: they know the Yankees' early history. Imagine they had not won a World Series since 1960. The heat they'd be under in this market. That's what Toronto is facing right now.
But the crazy thing about all that is people don't realize, if you're a younger hockey fan or you're not as experienced a hockey fan, the Leafs have the second most Stanley Cup titles of any team. And that's how good. I think by the time they won their last title, they were only behind Montreal by 1. I think it was 14-13 Montreal. But since then, well, really from like 67 through 93, which is when Montreal last won, it was just a Montreal onslaught. And then, Detroit got a lot better and a lot of these teams. But Toronto's the second best team in the history of the NHL.
Yeah, it's really bizarre seeing what happened with them. But let's talk about the Islanders here. And I mean, they've had obviously they got the brutal division. They had to get through the Pittsburgh Penguins the first round, Boston the second round. So that Boston series is impressive. They get the Wild win Game 5. Game 6 they win at the Coliseum, and it's a wild scene there. They're now going back to the semifinal round here. So what was your big takeaways about how they won this series?
Yeah. Well, first off, this is the toughest division because the Rangers were 5th and they had a better record than Montreal. And so, yeah, in a normal year, they'd be in. The Isles topping the Bruins, first off, the 3 and 4, that's how you know how strong this division is. Isles won this by strong defense. I can't remember what I was doing, but I was out somewhere the night of Game 1, and I came back to my house, and my family says, "Oh yeah, Pelech and the Bruins were beating up on Pelech and Pulock," which is kind of tough to differentiate those two when you're trying to say it. But the Isles turned the tables on the Bruins in this series. Pelech and Pulock were stars. Pierre Maguire mentioned it. They really did a great job of, like, for the most part, shutting down the top line and being really physical with these guys. And with the Bruins defense, we saw that with Palmieri and Kyle McAvoy. I didn't think that was a clean. I mean, that was an elbow, clearly, and I was disappointed that there wasn't a call there. But that whole thing with Palmieri and McAvoy, they were getting in their heads. So physicality, Pelech and Pulock, and then on top of that, the physicality of that fourth line, one of the best fourth lines in the NHL, in Matt Martin, Boomer's son-in-law, Cizikas, and Clutterbuck. They were really dominant. And I think as great, even though Matt Barzal is probably the most skilled player on that team, I think Brock Nelson had the best series of anyone. Yeah,
Brock Nelson had a huge series. I don't think Kyle Palmieri, like coming over from the Devils of the deadline, is also a massive pick of them. He had a huge series too.
Oh yeah, I said earlier this year they stole that trade. Yeah, Lou Lamoriello fleeced his old team when they got Zajac and Palmieri, and then of course last year when they got Andy Green, I was wondering what was it was funny to think I was watching Taylor Hall going to shake hands with, I mean, he wasn't in New Jersey for that long, but it was enough to win an MVP, and watching him shake hands with Palmieri and Zajac and Green or I don't know if he might have been there when Green was, but it was just weird to think.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw a stat on Twitter about this, that the Palmieri Zajac duo has like 7 combined playoff goals, and Taylor Hall had 2 for the Bruins, and that's just funny to think of how that worked out in terms of the trades.
Oh yeah, and that's through 2 rounds too. That's through 2 full rounds. And Palmieri's fairly good scorer, but Zajac is, especially since he's a little older, he's more of a defensive scorer. But Palmieri was one of the most clutch goal scorers for the Isles in the first 2 rounds, especially that goal in Game 1 against Pittsburgh.
Yeah, for sure. And they're going to play the Lightning next round. The Lightning closed out Carolina, who I was very high on going into the playoffs, but obviously they fell short against a strong Lightning team. What have you seen out of Tampa so far? They had a tougher draw at Florida in the first round than they did to Carolina here.
Yeah, I thought that Florida series, I took Florida to take it in 7 because I thought Florida was finally ready to make that leap, but especially with Joel Quenneville behind the bench. But unfortunately for them, they weren't able to do it. With Tampa, Carolina, to an extent, kind of lost this series as much as Tampa won it, because I said Alex Nedeljkovic, I think, gave up a couple of really bad goals. That first goal in Game 1 by Barclay Goodrow that iced it, and then the icer by Colton in Game 5. I thought that was the kind of the big difference. But I think the most important thing for Tampa was just not making a lot of mistakes, letting Carolina make mistakes. And on top of that, just the reemergence of Braden Point, who I thought should have won the Conn Smythe Trophy last year, because as good as Victor Hedman was and has been for that organization, Braden Point scored so many clutch goals in crunch time for that team that I think he's been the most important guy for that organization in their Stanley Cup run, winning last year and then making a run this year. Not Kucherov, not, of course, Stamkos with his injuries, not Hedman. I think Braden Point's the guy.
Yeah, it's fascinating watching them because this is basically pretty much the exact same team they brought back from last year. This year, it's like sort of similar to what's happening with the Buccaneers in the NFL, where they bring back basically everybody from the Super Bowl run. This is same city, same kind of deal. So it's interesting to see, like, sometimes those teams, especially last year during the bubble, shortened off season, main motivation's not there. This team seems to still have it all like locked in focus at this point.
Well, that's how they're trying to prove that it's not a fluke, I think, because they won the Stanley Cup last year in a bubble. You could say, no fans there, different rest, you're on a different playing field, which in some cases makes it more impressive. But I think I had this later in my notes, but I was going to bring up that the Lightning really are going to have to prove themselves in the next one, if not the next two rounds, because last year they went through Dallas, and Dallas, like the Rangers, in a normal year would have made the playoffs because they had a better record than Montreal. But Dallas, again, missed the playoffs this year after reaching the final, and a lot of people thought either Colorado or Vegas would reach the final. So now that it's probably going to be one of those two, you never know about Montreal. Tampa is really going to have to try to prove that it's not a fluke. I think they have more pressure on them than anyone.
Yeah, I think it's also fascinating because obviously last year they beat the Islanders in this round on the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, and it's the Eastern Conference Finals at that point. And it's just thanks to the weird nature of the COVID year with the divisions not playing each other. I can't think of another time in sports where we had like these teams meet in the playoffs, then don't meet again until the exact same spot in the playoffs. Especially in hockey, it's very rare.
It's really, it's especially weird to think this year, but I mean, with them staying with that divisional format. The funny thing is, Lightning are actually 3-0 all time against the Islanders in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and two of those times they went on to win the Stanley Cup.
Yes.
So I think the other one was
16 was the third one.
Was it 16? I was going to say maybe it was 15 when they went to the final, but no. Okay, it was 16. So I think they lost to Pittsburgh in the conference final that year. But the Lightning make a deep run at pretty much every time they face the Islanders. So I think the Lightning are more skilled. They have more of a championship pedigree, but I think the Islanders have a better structure. They have a much better defensive structure. That's what they've had for a long time. And I think part of that is Lou Lamoriello is doing what he did in New Jersey, where he built that team to play well from in front and really play a strong defensive structure. And on top of that, John Cooper's obviously a great coach. They won the Stanley Cup last year. Barry Trotz is one of the greatest coaches ever, and he's one of the winningest coaches ever. I think they have the edge in coaching as well.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting this year because obviously the Tampa, we talk about they stayed the same. Like, what do you think has changed with the Islanders from last series to this series in terms of the Tampa series matchups?
In terms of the roster, not really. I mean, in terms of the roster, really, it's just that they added Palmieri and Zajac, and they added two guys that. I mean, Palmieri doesn't have a lot of playoff experience, but Zajac, even though he's never won the Cup, was with the Devil team that went to the finals back in 2012. I think the biggest difference is having fans back, and especially having fans at the level that they've had. Not to mention, they're going to close Nassau Coliseum after this year, and they always called it the barn and Fort Never Lose. That place is raucous. I mean, did you hear them before that for the anthem the other night? I tweeted out. I said that I'm not sure if the Islanders are going to win because the crowd went like full Chicago Blackhawks during the anthem where everybody sings it, or lose because they were off key. But that crowd is wild. It's one of the best crowds in hockey. And I think home ice is going to make a huge difference. And of course, New York, or Long Island, really, I should specify, is more of a traditional hockey setting, a traditional hockey fan base, but Tampa has grown so exponentially anyway that home ice is going to be huge in this series for both teams.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on with the fans being there this year, because last year it's like, okay, this is what the teams are. There's no outside distractions. Like, it's just you're playing on there. There's some piped in noise, not a big deal. But now these teams are going on the road. They have like loud buildings, raucous fans. It's all going to be a true hockey playoff atmosphere. So this is really a true test of like, okay, like, especially that you saw how Nassau gets, and the Bruins were clearly bothered by their games in Nassau, as we saw it throughout this series. And I think the Lightning gains this experience. I mean, going through Florida and Carolina is not the same as playing in Nassau.
No, absolutely not. And it's fun. Once the Islanders won Game 5 in Pittsburgh, I figured, oh, there's no way they're going back. Because I think Boston, obviously Pittsburgh's won more in recent years, but Boston's the tougher team, I think, for sure. So I figured I could see, especially after the Bruins fought back from down 5-2 to force 5-4 in a game you could argue they should have won because they outshot the Islanders by like 25 in Game 5. I figured, okay, I could see them coming back and forcing Game 7, in which case, there's no doubt Bruins would have won that one. But the Islander, that fan base was intense. I think that part of that is the angst of people coming back. I think you saw that at MSG with the Knicks. And I think on top of that, it's that they're closing down this building and they're going to be moving. I think it's like 7 miles west to Elmont. So it was an intent, but it's funny to think, you go, last year we're going to be playing in Canada with nobody in the building except for us, some doctors and some security guards. And this year you've got the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft coming from the Jets, and you're going to have his offensive linemen crushing beers on their heads. So that's it's a complete turnaround. And it also shows how we are in a great place from last year.
Oh yeah, if you told me last year that we're going to have the playoffs, we're going to have fans in the buildings, there's not going to be many masks because everybody's getting vaccines, I would have said you're crazy. So good job by us as a country to get there. We still have work to do, but we made a lot of progress.
Certainly, yeah. I talk about that. I talk a little bit about that on a weekly. Well, I mean, that's the podcast. Of course, I said Sports in the Waiting Room, which is going to be weird. I can't really change the name, but it's going to be weird to keep that after everything gets back to normal. But yeah, I talk a little bit about the vaccine. I talked about the whole John Rahm thing, and him testing positive. So sorry, shameless plug. I didn't mean to really get into that, but it was a good transition, I guess. Yeah.
No worries, man. I mean, like, my name, it's like, I don't know, like, my name works because my teams all stink and they all lose most of the time. But like the second one my teams win, I don't know what I'm going to do, if I'm going to change it, if I'm going to keep it, because usually, like, I have the Mets, Jets, and Knicks, and they're all pretty terrible. So the second one of them wins, that's when it gets outdated a little bit. Yeah, but
the funny thing is, you got all of those, but all of those teams, like in the last 2 years, complete culture change. Knicks brought in Tibbs and Rose and West, and Leon Rose, let me specify, and then D Rose. And then, Jets brought in Salah. Douglas was the preliminary, and then Salah. And now Mets have actual ownership that won't get, have their money taken from them by Bernie Madoff. So,
yeah, that's certainly true. And let's get back to the Islanders for a minute. So, like, what's our created the Chris Russo keys to victory for the Islanders in this series?
Well, the Chris Russo keys to victory, that's my bad, Johnny Carson. I would say they stick to their defensive structure and there's defensive identity, that good, kind of neutral zone trap, as I mentioned about the everything with the Devils and Lou Lamoriello, and their physicality. I would also say consistent goaltending, because obviously I think Sorokin was the better goaltender in the first round. They opted to go to Varlamov in the second. And I think sticking with him, or if not, just having Sorokin ready, I think is going to be very important. Their goaltending is going to be key.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to try and go 1A, 1B at the Lightning because they're too good to like take advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. And let's go real quick. I mean, obviously in the other series out west, Montreal is through. As we're recording, Vegas and Colorado, the puck basically just dropped for that game. So right now, Vegas up 3-2 in the series here. Whoever gets through that, like, do you think Montreal's a shot here, or do you think it's going to be a steamroll for whoever wins that series?
If they knocked out Toronto, I would think they have some sort of shot. I don't think they're going to win this series, but I also couldn't have possibly met. I honestly think that the Leafs beat themselves more in that series than Montreal beat them. The Winnipeg series was a clean sweep, and I think part of that was, Scheifele getting suspended early on. But yeah, they got a shot against whoever was. I think more likely if Vegas wins, because I think Colorado's the stronger team. I think Nathan McKinnon is probably the strongest player in the NHL. But yeah, I can give him a shot. Look, hey, that was another one I said on the podcast this past week, that people forget that as great an organization Montreal's had, they've had Jean Beliveau and the Richard brothers and Lafleur and all those guys. As great and Plant, Dryden, I named like 15 guys that are remarkable Hall of Fame players with Montreal. The Yankees of hockey are close at least. But for as many guys as they had and as dominant they were through like the late 70s, the last two times they won the Cup in 86 and 93 after 79, they weren't that great. It was just Patrick Waugh carrying them, which is pretty much what Carey Price is doing right now. So, you run a hot goaltender? Yeah, absolutely, you can win.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, I picked Vegas preseason to win the Cup this year, so I'm hoping that comes through. I'm not going to mention who I had the other team was, because that's completely useless at this point. So I'm going to
say Toronto?
No, I did not say Toronto. It's somebody that not even make the team. So I'm going to leave that out there. People can go back to the archive, look that out. They want to see who actually picked to make the final against Vegas. But assuming one of these teams get through Vegas, Colorado here, and they play let's say the Islanders, and they get to the final against either the Islanders or Tampa, does whoever gets out of the series have a good shot here? Is it still whoever wins that Vegas Colorado series is the team to beat, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't think I think whoever wins that series might have been the team to beat once the playoffs started.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say that. And that's, and that's saying something when Tampa Bay won the Stanley Cup last year.
Yeah.
But I would say that Colorado or Vegas would be the team to beat. Even though Vegas is only 4 years old, you can still say they're due. Colorado, it looked like last year maybe they had hit their stride and then they lost to Dallas and so did Vegas. And this might be the time where they actually reach their peak and try to win, maybe multiple times. I would say Colorado or Vegas are the favorite, but anybody could still win this thing.
I feel like there's a lot of heat on Vegas right now to win, because I feel like they've come so close these past couple of years. I feel like if they don't win this year, especially if they can manage to close it out tonight in Game 6 at home, if they can't get this one, I feel like there might be a lot of pressure to try and change things up in that organization to try and make a different approach to winning the Cup.
Yeah, I always talk about Marc-Andre Fleury defies age. So he is, I think, by far the most important aspect of their franchise within the last 4 years since they started. Obviously, he was their first pick. And it's funny to think because, around here, people look at Henrik Lundqvist and think, like Henrik Lundqvist, the Penguins had a stronger team, but Henrik Lundqvist might have been a stronger goaltender. But Marc-Andre Fleury, who started playing 2 years before Lundqvist did, is somehow still going at a very, very high level. So it's remarkable. I think he just got named a finalist for the Vezina.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say if they win the Cup, he could be the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. But it's really remarkable, that run. But the fact he's gotten that old, they really might break down if they are not able to win this year. The pressure should be on them. And the fact that they missed out on a golden opportunity to win the President's Trophy head-to-head against Colorado earlier this year. And now that they've regained home ice after winning 3 straight. Yeah, if they do not win this game tonight, then everything swings back to Colorado for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And last thing before we go, gut time here. Who wins the Islanders series? How many games?
Oh, shoot. Okay. This is tough. Believe it or not, I actually had Colorado beating Toronto in the final when the playoffs started. I didn't make a preseason pick.
So when you did the bracket, you had Colorado, Toronto.
Yeah, I did a Stanley Cup bracket on the NHL website. I had Colorado and Toronto. I had the Islanders getting out of this division, but I had them getting knocked out
by Toronto.
I think by Toronto. Yeah, I had Colorado, the Islanders, Toronto, and Carolina. Oh boy, this is tough. I think I'm going Lightning in 7.
That seems like
my gut's kind of yeah.
Seems fair.
I think my gut's kind of telling me the Islanders, but I think the fact that Tampa's a more skilled team, they won the Cup last year, they're really out to prove something, and most importantly, they have home ice. I will take Tampa.
I think you're right there. I think if the Islanders win this year, it's going to have to be in 6. I don't think they're going down to Tampa and winning Game 7.
Oh yeah, it's going to have to be the same thing. Yeah, you have to finish this thing in 6 games. It's very tough to win a game 7 in Tampa. Hey, they proved that a few years ago. Well, the first time they won the Stanley Cup, I think they won the conference final and the cup final in a 7th game at home.
Yeah, well, there you have it, Chris. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I'll be a follow on social media. Keep up with your podcast.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Chris Russo 98, CHRISRUSSO 98, and then you can honestly just Google or Bing or just Ask Jeeves still exists. The podcast is called Sports in the Waiting Room, and you can find us on Apple Podcast. I can't believe I'm actually running that. I have a podcast on Apple Podcasts, on I think Spotify. You can find, I think Google Podcasts. You can find it all over the place. But if you just Google it, you can find it. We're up to, I can't believe, 31 episodes already.
Yeah, it's crazy how time flies. You're having fun with these things.
Yeah, it's insane. When we've been locked down too, it's insane to think all that time has passed. But yeah, I've very much enjoyed it.
Chris, thanks for all the time. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me, man.